The senator grabbed Darcy Winslow's wrist and leaned in close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Stay a while," he said, low and slow, like it was an invitation she should feel lucky to receive. Darcy went very still. She had exactly 3 seconds of absolute calm, the kind her mother used to call the quiet before good sense kicks in. And then she did something no one in the Grand Halcyon Hotel ballroom expected. She didn't pull away. She didn't raise her voice. She simply shifted her weight, planted both feet, and became, in the space of one breath, completely immovable. Then she turned her wrist in the one direction his grip couldn't follow, stepped back, and watched Senator Clifford Haas stumble forward into the edge of the bar cart he'd been leaning against. 3 crystal glasses toppled. 1 bottle of 15-year scotch went sideways. The sound of it hitting the marble floor was extraordinary. The Grand Halcyon Ballroom had been hosting charity galas for 40 years. Nothing had ever sounded quite like that. Every conversation stopped. From across the room, inside a cordoned private section draped in charcoal velvet, one man didn't move. Theron Valenti sat with one arm, resting along the back of his chair, a glass of water. Not whiskey, never whiskey at events like this, held loosely in his other hand. He watched the bookkeeper, from the hotel's finance department, stand very straight in the middle of the frozen ballroom, her face composed, her breathing controlled. And he thought something he hadn't thought in a long time. Interesting. His assistant, Vincent, leaned down. "Should I?" "No." Theron set his glass on the table. "Watch." The ballroom unfroze in pieces. A few guests rushed to Senator Haas. Others reached for their phones. A hotel manager appeared from nowhere, earpiece visible, expression professionally horrified. Darcy Winslow stood at the center of all of it without moving an inch, her accounting ledger tucked under her arm. She had been delivering revised expense reports for the gala's charity auction, which was the kind of task that only fell to Darcy, because she was the only one who could catch a $4,000 error in a room full of distracted event planners. She hadn't planned on being anyone's headline tonight. Senator Haas pulled himself upright, his face a dark, mottled red. "That woman assaulted me." He pointed at Darcy the way men like him pointed at things they expected to disappear. "I want her name. I want her supervisor. I want this hotel to understand what just happened here." Darcy looked at him steadily. "I asked you to let go. You grabbed a United States senator. You grabbed me first." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise either. It simply stayed exactly where it was, clear and factual as an audited spreadsheet. 3 times, I counted. Several guests nearby went very quiet. A woman in a green dress pressed her lips together in an expression that looked a lot like suppressed approval. An older gentleman set down his fork. The hotel manager, a thin man named Sylvester Mohn, stepped forward with the particular velocity of someone who had built his entire career on making wealthy people's discomfort disappear. "Miss Winslow, why don't we step aside?" "I'd rather not," Darcy said, and then, because she was Darcy Winslow and she could not fully stop herself, she looked at the overturned bar cart and said, very quietly, "Is the scotch salvageable? That bottle wasn't on the gala's complimentary list. Someone's going to have to account for it." The woman in the green dress made a noise that was almost certainly a laugh. From the private section, Theron Valenti said nothing. He lifted his water glass again and watched. He had arrived at the Grand Halcyon that evening, for reasons that had nothing to do with the charity gala. The gala was simply useful cover, a crowd of powerful, preoccupied people who wouldn't notice the quiet meetings happening in private dining rooms while they bid on vacation packages and congratulated themselves on their generosity. Theron ran 3 legitimate hotel groups through a holding company that most people in the room had heard of, and one operation beneath all of it that none of them had. He attended events like this once or twice a year. He remembered very little about most of them. He had noticed Darcy Winslow 40 minutes before the incident, when she moved through the ballroom with the particular focus of someone doing real work, in a room full of people performing importance. She was easy to overlook, round-faced, dark-haired, carrying a folder thick enough to be a weapon, wearing the kind of modest blazer and slacks combination that said, "I am not here to be looked at." Most people's eyes slid past her without stopping. Theron's didn't. He had spent 20 years learning to read rooms, and something about the way this woman moved through, one told him she was doing the same thing. She catalogued exits. She noticed when the security rotation changed. She clocked the senator's table 3 separate times without once looking directly at it. He had been mildly curious. Now he was something more than that. After security separated Darcy and the senator into different areas of the lobby, Senator Haas demanding attorneys and anyone who would listen. Darcy sitting quietly on a low bench with her ledger in her lap. Theron stood. Vincent appeared instantly. "Sir? I want to see any camera footage from the bar area in the last hour." He straightened his jacket cuff. "Everything." The hotel's security director. "Will cooperate." He paused. "Ask politely." Vincent had worked for Theron Valenti for 11 years. He knew that ask politely meant something different coming from this man than it did from most. But he also knew that Theron had never once needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted, and tonight would not be different. He stepped away to find the security director. Theron crossed the ballroom at a measured pace, speaking briefly to 2 separate business acquaintances along the way, so that anyone watching would see nothing unusual. Just a man making the rounds. He passed close enough to where Darcy sat that he could have spoken to her. He didn't, but he did stop for one moment. She was looking at the ledger, not staring blankly at it the way people do when they're pretending to focus. She was actually working, pencil moving in small, deliberate marks. A woman who had just been grabbed by a senator in a ballroom full of witnesses was sitting on a lobby bench auditing expense reports, because, Theron suspected, she didn't know what else to do with her hands. He walked on. The faint expression on his face was not something many people had ever seen there. Darcy's mother had been a cleaning supervisor at a mid-size convention hotel in Ohio for 22 years. Her name was Ruth Ann, and she had the hands of someone who had scrubbed floors and balanced household accounts in equal measure, and never once complained about either. Darcy had been 12 when a guest cornered her mother in the service hallway, and made a suggestion that still made Darcy's jaw tighten when she thought about it. Her mother had said, very evenly, "No thank you," and then she had made herself as physically solid as a person could make themselves. Planted, grounded, immovable, and the man had found that there was nothing to push against, and eventually he had left. On the drive home that evening, Ruth Ann had explained it simply. "Don't make yourself small when someone tries to push you around," she'd said. "Small is what they're counting on. You go heavy. Heavy is harder to move." Darcy had asked if she should fight back. "No." Her mother had glanced over. "You should leave. Fighting keeps you in the room. Leaving takes you home." She had taught Darcy the same thing she'd taught herself. How to break a wrist grip, using leverage instead of strength. How to use body weight as an anchor. How to step through a space that someone thought they were blocking. Not self-defense in any dramatic sense. Just physics. Just the stubborn, practical geometry of a woman who knew she was going to have to move through difficult spaces and planned to do it on her own terms. For 17 years, Darcy had never needed any of it. Until tonight. Sitting in the hotel lobby with a pencil behind her ear and 3 corrections marked in the gala's expense ledger, she exhaled slowly and thought. She would have been glad it worked. The grief came quietly, the way it always did when she thought about her mother. Ruth Ann Winslow had passed 3 years ago, December, sudden and without warning. The way unfair things always seemed to arrive. Darcy had taken a week off work and then come back and audited the entire company's Q4 expenses to have something to do with the feeling. She was still, in some ways, auditing. The scotch, she reminded herself, looking at her ledger. Someone is going to have to account for that scotch. The next morning, Darcy arrived at work to find a voice message from Sylvester Mohn, asking her to come to his office before she clocked in. She had expected this. She had not slept particularly well, but she had prepared for it, gone over the facts in her head the way she went over columns of numbers, looking for errors, finding none. She had asked the senator to release her wrist. She had asked twice. The physics had done the rest. Mohn's office smelled like carpet cleaner and controlled anxiety. He folded his hands on the desk and used the particular tone of a man who has decided in advance what kind of conversation this will be. Mrs. Winslow, I think you understand that the Halcyon's relationship with Senator Haas represents a significant. I understand that I was assaulted in the course of doing my job, Darcy said, and that I removed myself from the situation, using the minimum force available to me. Mohn blinked. He had been expecting more hesitation. The incident has generated some media attention. He slid a printed news alert across the desk. A gossip site had posted a 15-second phone clip, cropped to show only the bar cart going over and Darcy stepping back. The headline read, "Hotel Employee Attacks Charity Gala Guest." Darcy looked at it for a long moment. That's not what happened. The full context is available on every camera in that ballroom. She met his eyes. I assume you've reviewed them. A pause. The hotel is reviewing all available footage. Then you know what they show. Mohn's jaw worked slightly. Pending that review, and given the sensitivity of the situation, the hotel is placing you on a temporary administrative leave. Paid. Another pause, longer. Paid administrative leave. Until we determine the appropriate course of action. Darcy sat with that for a moment. 8 years she had worked for the Grand Halcyon Hotel Group. She had found $180,000 in billing errors in her first 18 months. She had restructured the Gallo accounting system so thoroughly that the annual charity audit now took 2 days instead of 11. She had learned every vendor's contract schedule, every manager's budget quirk, every seasonal fluctuation in the hotel's operational costs, because she was good at her job, and she could not make herself stop being good at it, even when no one was watching. How long? She asked. We'll be in touch within the week. She nodded slowly, stood, picked up her bag. Mr. Mohn. She turned at the door. The scotch that was broken last night was a 2009 single malt. It wasn't on the gala's complimentary inventory. It was on Senator Haas's personal tab, which means the breakage should be billed to his account directly, not absorbed into event costs. A beat. I already corrected the ledger. The updated report is on the shared drive. She walked out before he could respond. In the elevator alone, she pressed her back against the wall and let herself shake for exactly 30 seconds. Then she stopped. Then she went home. The footage was on every major platform by noon. Not the 15-second clip. The full recording, 4 camera angles, synchronized, showing the complete sequence of events from the moment Darcy approached the bar area with her expense report to the moment Senator Haas stumbled into his own overturned display. The caption, posted by an anonymous account, contained no commentary, just a timestamp and a location, and 2 words, full context. The internet did the rest. Former hospitality workers filled the comments. Security professionals weighed in on the mechanics of the escape. A retired detective appeared on a morning podcast to explain the legal distinction between assault and self-defense, using the footage as a case study. By the time the clip reached 1 million views, the 15-second version had been largely discredited, and Senator Haas had cancelled 2 scheduled media appearances. Darcy knew none of this until her downstairs neighbor knocked on her door at 2 in the afternoon and said breathlessly, "Darcy, you're everywhere." She was sitting at her kitchen table, doing her personal tax estimates. "That can't be right," she said. It was. She watched the full clip herself once, with her hands folded in her lap and her face very still. She looked, she thought, like a woman who'd desperately wanted to leave and was doing the absolute minimum necessary to make that possible, which was accurate, which was exactly what her mother had taught her. She closed the laptop and went back to her tax estimates because she didn't know what else to do. 3 days later, Darcy received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Winslow." The voice was unhurried, male, the kind of voice that had never had to explain itself to anyone. "My name is Theron Valenti." She knew the name. Anyone who worked in high-end hospitality knew the name. Valenti Group owned 4 hotel brands across 11 cities, and the rumor in the industry, unverified, unverifiable, was that the hotels were only the surface of what Theron Valenti owned. "I've been following the situation with some interest," he continued. Darcy pulled out a notepad. Old habit. "How did you get this number?" "I was at the gala." She remembered a face now, seated in the private section, watching. Dark suit, completely still while everything else moved. She had clocked him the way she clocked everything, as information to be filed. "What can I do for you, Mr. Valenti?" A pause, brief and deliberate. "I'd like to offer you a meeting. I have a proposal I think you'll find worth your time." "About what?" "About the fact," he said, "that the Halcyon's internal review process is going to conclude that you violated guest relations protocol, regardless of what the footage shows, and about what comes after that." Darcy's pencil stopped moving. "When?" she said. The restaurant he chose was quiet and expensive, and not the kind of place she'd normally eat, and Darcy arrived 7 minutes early because she always arrived early, because early meant you got to watch the room settle before anyone was watching you. Theron Valenti was already there. She hadn't expected that. Men like him were late as a power move, or so she'd always assumed. He stood when she approached, which she also hadn't expected, and gestured to the chair across from him without theatrics. "Thank you for coming." "You said it would be worth my time," she said. "I've learned to take that kind of statement at face value until proven otherwise." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the approximation of one. The way a very controlled person allows small things to surface when they've decided someone has earned it. He slid a folder across the table before she had finished, settling into her chair. "I've been in the process of acquiring the Halcyon Group for the past 4 months," he said. "The transaction finalized this morning." Darcy looked at the folder, then at him. "This morning?" "Yes." She opened it. The acquisition summary was clean, comprehensive, and entirely real. She scanned it with the speed of someone who had read thousands of documents exactly like it, her eyes moving down the columns of figures with the same attention she gave her own expense ledgers. "That's a significant purchase," she said. "It is. The Halcyon's books have a $340,000 discrepancy in their event revenue reporting over the past 2 fiscal years. I've had 3 accounting firms review it. None of them found it." Darcy's pencil appeared from somewhere. Where? Vedon contract renewals, cross-referenced against actual service delivery invoices. The variance compounds across. "The seasonal billing cycles," she said. "Yes. I found it 8 months ago. I submitted a correction report. It was filed, and nothing happened." Theron Valenti looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than most moments. "I know," he said. She set the pencil down. "You already knew." Your correction report was among the documents I reviewed during due diligence. He folded his hands on the table. You flagged a complex, multi-layered accounting error that 3 professional firms missed. You filed the report. You followed up twice, and then you came back the next day and kept doing your job. Darcy looked at the table. She was not, as a general rule, someone who got emotional over being recognized for competence. She had done good work quietly for a long time and expected nothing in return except continued employment. She found to her mild alarm that her eyes were stinging slightly. I have a position, Theron continued, for a director of financial integrity across the Valenti Group's hotel portfolio. It would involve reviewing all 11 properties, standardizing reporting systems, identifying inefficiencies. A pause. It is a significant role. I'm a bookkeeper. You're a woman who catches things other people miss. He met her eyes. That is a significantly rarer skill. She looked at the folder again, the title page, the organizational chart. The position he was describing, outlined in clean professional language, at a level she had never allowed herself to want, because she had never seen a reason to believe it was available to her. I have one condition, she said. He waited. Every hotel property in the Valenti Group, every single one, needs a formal process for employees to report guest misconduct. Not informal. Not talk to your manager. A documented system with real follow-through and no retaliation. She looked up. I've worked in hospitality for 8 years. I've watched people absorb things they should never have had to absorb because there was no mechanism to say, this is not acceptable without risking everything. A beat. That changes. The table was quiet. It will also need teeth, she added. Not a hotline that goes to a binder. A committee with real authority, regular audits, training for every manager-level employee on how to actually respond when someone comes to them. Theron Valenti studied her face for a long moment. Those were already in the operational restructuring plan, he said finally. I was hoping you'd raise them. Darcy blinked. You were. I wanted to know if you'd ask. He extended his hand across the table. Done. She looked at his hand. Then she shook it. You agreed very quickly, she said. I made the decision before I called you. She sat back slightly. Then why the meeting? Because the plan needs someone who actually understands what these employees need. Not a consultant's summary. He paused. And because I wanted to see whether you'd walk in here and negotiate for yourself or negotiate for everyone else first. She thought about that. Which was the right answer? The approximation of a smile appeared again. You led with everyone else, he said, which told me you'll protect this portfolio's integrity the same way, not because someone's watching, because it matters to you. Darcy looked out the window at the street, at the ordinary, unheroic afternoon moving past. A delivery driver, a woman walking a dog gog, the unremarkable machinery of a city going about its business. My mother used to say the goal isn't to win, she said quietly. It's to go home. Theron was still for a moment. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She was. Darcy closed the folder. She cleaned hotel rooms for 22 years. She was the best person in any room she walked into, and most people never noticed her. A pause. I notice everything. The table was quiet in the best way, the way of two people who have said something real and are letting it settle without hurrying it along. I think, Theron said, that's exactly why I called you. 9 months later, the Valenti Group's employee conduct policy had become something the hospitality industry discussed in conference rooms and trade publications. Not because it was dramatic, but because it worked. The reporting system had real response times. The training programs used actual scenarios drawn from actual incidents. The retaliation clause had actual enforcement, and 3 managers across 2 properties had already learned that Theron Valenti's definition of actual enforcement was not a gentle conversation. Darcy travelled between properties twice a month. She sat with housekeepers and line cooks and front desk staff and barbacks and asked them, simply, what wasn't working. She took notes in the small, precise hand of someone who had never been able to stop noticing things. She filed reports that people actually read, because people who didn't read Darcy Winslow's reports had a way of discovering, in various uncomfortable ways, that they should have. At the Miami property, a 23-year-old dining room attendant named Briella pulled her aside after a policy briefing and said, without much preamble, "I just wanted to say thank you, because before all this, I thought I just had to." She stopped. Tried again. "I didn't know I was allowed to say no." Darcy thought about her mother, about a service hallway in Ohio, and a woman who had made herself heavy and gone home. "You always were," she said. "We just needed to make sure everyone knew it." Theron heard about that exchange through the property manager's weekly report. He read it twice. He had been finding over the past 9 months that Darcy Winslow had a way of making him reconsider assumptions he had held for a long time. About how organizations functioned, about what people actually needed, about what kind of strength was worth cultivating. He had built his empire on a version of power that was cold and controlled and very effective. She moved through the world differently, not soft, not naive, just unwilling to let expediency become an excuse for the kind of small cruelties that people in comfortable positions convinced themselves were necessary. It was, he had found, genuinely difficult to argue with. He had tried twice and had not enjoyed the experience of losing. One evening in late autumn, after they finished reviewing a quarterly restructuring report at the Halcyon's executive floor, her Halcyon, now, in the way that places become yours when you've changed them, he walked her to the lobby. They had been doing this more often recently, he had noticed, finding reasons to be in the same building, staying slightly longer than the meeting required. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm often quiet." "You're different quiet tonight." He looked at her. Outside the lobby windows, the city carried on in its indifferent, beautiful way. A cab honked somewhere. A food cart vendor laughed at something. "I owe you something," he said. She tilted her head. "The scotch? I told you it was on Haas's tab." "Not the scotch." He stopped walking. An admission. She waited. She was very good at waiting. He had noticed this early on, that she never filled silence the way most people did, out of discomfort or habit. She let it exist until something real came to fill it. "I've spent a long time believing that watching was enough," he said. "Observing, positioning, moving pieces from a distance." A pause. "You've made me reconsider whether someone who only watches is actually doing anything worth doing." Darcy looked at him steadily. "You bought a hotel company," she said. "You rewrote the conduct policy. You're funding the training program at cost across all 11 properties, which your CFO told me last week is not nothing." She tilted her head slightly. "That's not watching." "I did those things," he said, "because of what I saw that night. Because of you." She was quiet for a moment. Down the lobby, the late-night concierge moved discreetly, pretending with great professionalism not to have noticed that the Valenti Group chairman had been standing in the same spot for an unusually long time. "My mother," Darcy said finally, "used to say that the best thing you can do in any room is make it a little safer for everyone else who has to be in it." A pause. "She was talking about cleaning, mostly, but I think it applies more broadly." "It does," he said. "I know it does because I've watched you prove it for 9 months." The lobby was very quiet around them. Theron took one careful step closer. Not presumptuous, just closer. The kind of closer that acknowledges something without demanding it be named before either person is ready. "Darcy." His voice was lower now, the boardroom evenness gone somewhere private. "I'd like to have dinner. Not a meeting, not a debrief." A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Dinner. She looked at him for a long moment, with the expression she got when she was checking figures. Thorough, unhurried, unwilling to commit until she was certain the numbers actually meant what they appeared to mean. The scotch, she said finally, is definitely still on Hars's tab. He almost laughed. It was the closest thing to a laugh she had ever heard from him. Low and genuine and arriving like something that had been waiting a while for permission. Yes, he said, it is. Okay, she said, dinner. True strength, Darcy had come to understand, was not a thing you performed. You didn't carry it like a credential or display it like a trophy on a shelf. You moved through difficult rooms the way her mother had. Grounded, unhurried, refusing to be made small. And you brought other people home safely when it was in your power to do so. The rest, she was quietly learning, had a way of following.